Hello, my name is Christian Davenport. I suppose everyone will refer to this in a variety of different ways. This is a virtual memorial celebration, discussion, chat, hangout, all of these things regarding Will H. Moore. First off, we apologize that we could not have 100 people on this thing. We had to limit something at a certain point in time. And so we did our best to accommodate, and we will do our best to kind of accommodate as many people in as many different ways that they wish to celebrate and participate as possible. The limitations of our technology. I had this intro of sorts that I do not wish to mourn Will. I cannot do that. I wish to live him. He cannot be gone if we breathe him out, if we speak him, if we act as he would act, if we will, if we more, then he is here. So in line with that, today is a discussion, this chat, a warming, a mind walk with Willness. And I kind of gave some suggestions for how people could do things, like how we met, what we remember, what he taught us, and where we still need to go. I'll lead it off, and then whoever wants to chime in. Will is always fond of our remembrance of how we met, because we didn't actually speak the first time we met. It was at APSA, where it was like right after the LA riots, and so it was a panel, and there was Doug McAdam and Ted Gurr on the panel. And so I had gone there to make my kind of professional bones, so to speak, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna meet one of these people. I don't know who it is though. And so the whole time I'm not hearing what they're saying about squat. It was like, yeah, forget everything else. I'm just like, okay, am I gonna talk to Ted? Am I gonna go after Doug? Ted, Doug, Ted, Doug. And I was just like, okay, well, Doug's a sociologist, so I could get him later. And so let me go for Ted. So then I'm like following him, and he's walking out the room. He's like walking out of the room, and I'm like mirroring him, I'm shadowing him, and I finally get in front of him. And I had my thing down. I'm just like, Professor Gurr, my name's Christian Davenport. Nice to meet you. I'm a graduate student at blah, blah, blah. And here's two things that I wrote that were very much inspired by your work. And Will was right behind him. So Will gives me his version of this later on. He's basically like, all I see is Ted. And he was standing right there. And he was waiting to get his hello. And so Will said that I look so determined and Ted looked so calm with it that he just grabbed a seat and he just kind of chilled. And so later on, when I officially meet Will, he's like, nah, man, we met before. And I'm like, where? And so he described this whole scenario, and he was just like, he's like, nah, I just kind of knew it was going to be one of those moments, and you just won't go leave him alone. So I figured I'd just chill, and we get back to it later on. And so we end up officially meeting after I get the Houston job. And then Will is just like, yeah, I wanted that job. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm sorry. I didn't know. And so then that was kind of like our opening or our beginning. For my Will moment, I will use a prop, because this is what we did it on. So Will and I were basically complaining about the discipline, and we were trying to figure out what we should do. And so essentially it became a riffing session on like all the things we wanted to fix. So we divided it up into 4 different, so the top of it is called the plan, DA plan. And basically it was like, okay, so we had con EDU, it was conflict EDU, it was conflict interdisciplinary, it was conflict materials, and conflict what we call suites. And so the conflict consortium kind of emerged from this board, which is, I'm glad I didn't erase this squat, because I was just going to get rid of it at some point. But Will was just like, nah, man, it's historical, keep it. And so we only did a couple of the things on this. We did minefields and we did the virtual workshop. But effectively, I'll now be trying to get this done, because this is in part kind of his legacy and the stuff that we kind of talked about, and one of the reasons why I started kind of like living the out loud part. But the Will moment was not only his willingness to kind of like chat with you about wherever you happen to be going. And that's why I kind of get on this mind walk riff in the stuff that I was writing about him, because I don't know if anyone saw the movie, which is really great, but I made Will see it. And so, but it was this whole idea of like, you'd have a conversation with somebody and you'd end up in a spot that was very different from the place that you started, and you wouldn't even notice that space and time and everything had moved along with it. And I just kind of viewed conversations with Will in that particular moment. So I think that also kind of like segues to his inspiration, or the effect that he has on you. This I remember the first time that Will introduced me to his students, like, so we basically kind of interacted a bunch of times, and he just like brought me down to Florida State, and it was this amazing kind of like unit. I loved it. I wonder if anybody remembers it, but I remember we were all sitting around a table, and like they were already like the unit, and you clearly felt like the interloper, but basically being Will, they already read your stuff, and so basically you just kind of like came up to the table, and they were just like all like, oh wow, you know, nice to meet you. We've heard a lot about you and all this other business. But the degree to which they kind of engage with one another and had that kind of, from the outsider's perspective, that's why I'm glad we have some people that had the insider perspective as well of being one of the students. The outsider perspective was just like, that was something real special. That was this nurturing moment. This was this kind of incubator of basically of emotion and sense and awareness and awakening that was just truly, you walked away from that going, you know, I want some more of that. I want to create that. I want to feel that. And I think that kind of way that he taught or mentored or interacted was just simply inspirational. So I just wanted to kind of get us started with some of that. But whoever, I'm more or less the DJ / MC. However, if there's a dull moment or there's an opening, I will come back in with some stuff and like help keep things going. But who's feeling it? Who wishes to begin?
I'll go.
Shoot.
Since I probably go back the furthest with Will. So he and I started graduate school. So literally the first time I met Will was when I walked into Mike Ward's Introduction to Research Methods class. And so this is my first day in graduate school and his first day in graduate school as well. And even when he was still very young, Will stood out in lots of really interesting ways. And little did I know that I was meeting the person that was probably going to be the most influential in terms of my own career. I certainly had, you know, some great advisors over the years, and I've worked with a lot of people.
Introduce yourself, man.
Oh, sorry, I'm David Davis. But when I think about what I learned in graduate school and then becoming a professor and then working in the discipline over the last 30 years, Will was clearly the most influential person in my career and in my life. And so I simply could not imagine having chosen what I've done and made it through without Will's unending support, right? He was an incredibly selfless person. He was always willing to help you out on anything. And it was outstanding. Having chosen what I've done and made it.
Steve, mute.
Okay, so I guess maybe I'll just mention a couple of other things about Will that that stuck with me over the last 30 years, and I think it's mostly how deeply committed he was. And so Will really believed just in the social science discipline and the way in which the social sciences can make the world a better place. And he believed that by doing what we do, right, by working really hard, we can make the world a better place. And for him, that translated at all levels, right? So that meant you really work hard to train your students to be great students, because then they're going to be able to make the world a better place. And you conduct interesting research on questions that really matter, because the answers to those questions will help make the world a better place. And you work hard to build community, right? You reach out, you support each other, you try to encourage the exchange of ideas, because it's going to make the world a better place. So I think of his contributions as just being almost immeasurable to the discipline, but certainly to my life. So I'll go ahead and stop there.
You pause there, man. I'm sure there'll be more. This is I've had these "It's a Wonderful Life" moments, right? The Frank Capra movie. I love that shit. But oh, sorry. But it's also this other issue of we're kind of doing it without the lead character present in a form, in a version of it, but basically still kind of hitting that. So who's feeling the next? Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I first met Will in 1994, I think at the summer program at the Hoover Institute that Bueno de Mesquita ran. So we spent 2 weeks together there. We then became colleagues at Florida State 3 years later. In '97, Will was hired, and Ashley Leeds and I were also hired the same year. And then Paul Hensel had been hired there 2 years before that. So we had we were all, I don't know if we were all like right next to each other, but maybe one office separated the four of us. And it was an incredible time to be a junior scholar. And of course, I spent many days just randomly going into Will's office and seeking his advice about lots of things. And we, he was, the primary mentor that I had as an assistant professor. I don't think I could be where I am today without all of the mentoring and advice that Will gave me. He also challenged a lot of things that I believed about myself, things I believed about the discipline. So we also had a lot of arguments, some very intense, but some that were really fun. So in terms of what I most remember about him, he was such an engaged person in terms of building community in a department. I learned a lot about teaching from him. So one of the things that I think was unique was that Will and I actually sat in on each other's graduate courses. So he took my time series analysis class, and then I took his political violence class, and then a class he taught on dynamic models and international relations. And so that was a really cool experience, actually having a colleague come in and take your entire class and do all the readings and ask all the good questions. And so through those classes, I got to see the way that he structured his graduate seminars, but I also got to see and talking with him about how he taught undergraduates. And so one of the things that I learned from him was that he ran his courses in a discussion format, where he would use, some of you may know this, poker chips to call on people. So you basically ask a question. If nobody answers, draw somebody randomly out using a poker chip system. I actually adopted this system. I still use it today. And it transformed my teaching from what I think was pretty shitty junior professor, lecturing format to a much more engaging environment. And so a lot of, I think my improvements as a teacher came from Will. I joked with Christian that he should be wearing a dress because I always remember that Will would wear a dress once a semester to teach his students about norms. So you teach people about norms by violating norms. And I think that was classic Will Moore. So in terms of some of the things, in terms of his research contributions, I think he always challenged, first of all, the way we think about conflict. So I remember, if you remember, he had this presentation called The Dark Side of Cow, where he challenged the correlates of war's tendency to, let's call it, to code the endpoint of escalation. So we're going to call a mid. We're going to take a bunch of things that led up to a militarized dispute, and then we're going to code it at a particular point in time. And so one thing I really appreciated in working with Will is how important events data were, and kind of breaking things down into more component parts. And that was something that really influenced the way that, in terms of how we constructed the issue correlates of war data, we made sure to build a chronology of events. So even though we were coding issue claims, we also embedded within that, a deeper events chronology that we could always go back to and make use of. I think another thing I learned from Will is definitely conceptualization. So he would always challenge the way that what is your concept? What is your measurement? He was always just getting to the heart of, how does your research design actually implement what you say in your theory? So he was one of the best people in terms of providing comments on research that probably I've ever worked with in my career. But that also meant that, and this is another thing I will say about Will, is that he was what I call a truth speaker. So he was a person who would tell you, everything, whether you want to hear it or not. Now, when I met, I would say Ashley is the same way. So when I met Will and Ashley, it was really freeing for me, because I've always been a truth speaker also. And I always felt like a misfit, right? That there's something wrong with being, Bill Clark, when we met at Hoover, Bill Clark, jokingly called me Savage Sarah. And so that gives you a sense of, right, people thought that my outspokenness, was savage in some way. But when Will and Ashley were my colleagues, I came to see that being a truth speaker is actually, it's a quality that we should value in academia. We shouldn't, now I think about Will being gone, and it's hard for me, because I want Will to tell me when I'm doing something good or bad. And it's really shitty that he left us, because he should be here to continue his truth speaking. So I will say right now in my truth speaking that I am angry with Will for making a selfish choice and for leaving, a future generation of scholars that would have benefited from working with him. So in terms of legacy, I think he's created, like I said, a very generous and supportive environment for junior scholars. I think that's his legacy. His students have gone on to be amazing success stories. The faculty that he mentored as colleagues, I think, have been successful. That's something that, I hope in Will Mooring forward that I will do a better job in creating the kind of environment that he did. He had a champagne toast for me when I got my first AJPS article. He had a champagne toast for me when I got tenure. He was always celebrating those big moments, and probably most recently when I was Peace Science president the year after him, he took me out for dinner and drinks and just congratulated me on that success. And so I really appreciate, both the brutal honesty about my work and when it was flawed, but also the fact that he was there for me and supporting me in all of those really important moments in my career. And I will miss him terribly. Thanks.
Sarah, thanks for that. I want to read you're muted. Did you try to demute, man? I see your lips moving. Nope.
No, I just muted.
All right, Reed. So unmute again.
Okay.
Okay, dude. You need to figure that one out. Okay, so let me two fingers Sarah thing. Two things she said that kind of resonated really strongly. One, the empowering element of Will, which is fascinating to think about. This I like the truth speak label, but this once I found this lyric of a Mos Def rap, I showed it to Will, and I remember he's like, yeah, that was a good one. And when Mos Def makes a comment, it's just like people act like hip hop is some giant in the hillside, but we are hip hop, and but Will made me kind of acknowledge that, that we individually, we are the discipline. We sometimes act as if the discipline is something that's outside of us, that's a little bit bigger, but that we compose it through our actions, and that everything that we're actually able to pull off becomes then the discipline. And so he took me away from kind of the structuralist thing, the agency thing, which was really there, which made me think of that. I think I've been every possible emotion thus far. I think I'm on the angry bit. I'm on the reflective bit. But there's this movie called The Ballad of Narayama. It's an old Japanese movie. So anyone who knows me knows that I probably have some old Japanese movie for everything. And Will would remark about that as well. The Ballad of Narayama is important for me in the sense that there's this moment in this particular society. Will thought it was analogous to like Logan's Run or something like that. But there's a moment in every society where the community acknowledges that it can only be so big. So at a certain point, you have to put the oldest person on your back, their relative, and you have to carry them up the mountainside to let them pass in the snow, basically. But you are taking them to that level. And I'm kind of caught with regards to thinking, are we the old person that Will was carrying for a while, or we the young person carrying Will, but I know, I feel that there's something in the imagery that kind of helped me think it, in that we were kind of perhaps carrying each other up the hill for a little while, and then we left homeboy there, or he left us there. I can't. I think the mutuality was kind of present. But Reed, you unmuted? Damn, dude. All right, so someone who can actually speak. No offense, man.
I can try to jump in.
Yep, I hear you. All right, Reed, keep working, man.
So I'm Danny Hill. I was a student of Will's. I first met him when I visited the political science department after I was accepted to the graduate program at Florida State. And I was completely clueless about what I wanted to do with myself at the time. And he could tell right away. He recalled that conversation with me a couple of years later and told me he viewed me as basically a coin flip at the time. He had no idea whether I would make it through the program or not. Fortunately, I did. We actually didn't get to know each other that well until the end of my first year as a graduate student, which was when I became one of his students. And the way that happened was that he sat me down outside of the political science building at Florida State and said something like, I can't tell if you give a shit or not, but if you do, you could be good at this, which is typically kind of blunt Will, right? But I loved it. I found it very endearing and actually very encouraging because I did give a shit. I'm just not always the best at conveying that. So from that point forward, I tried to make that as obvious as I could. And I was encouraged because he was the first professor to really express interest in me as a student. And I really owe him, a number of people have said this over the past weeks and even minutes, how much they owe him. And I owe him professionally more than I could ever hope to pay anyone back. As far as what I'm gonna remember the most about him, something I really envied about him, actually, which was his ability to just start a very long, interesting, worthwhile, kind of intense conversation. Just out of thin air, he could sort of conjure up a great conversation. Like, I spent a month with him at the ICPSR summer program in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So we stayed in the same house together for a month. And it was a great month. Just being in Ann Arbor for a month, hanging out, doing the program was great. But some of my best memories from that time are of just sitting in that house with him, having conversations about whatever, for hours sometimes. I always found it really easy to talk to him. And we never had a boring conversation. And every time we would see each other, Will was not a big phone guy, and neither am I, so we didn't talk that much unless we saw each other in person. But whenever we did, we would just sort of pick up right where we had left off. Conversation always flowed very easily. And that's something that I'm really gonna miss about him. In terms of his impact on the discipline, so much has been written, just the sheer volume of what's been written about him over the past couple of weeks. I think it's obvious that he had a really large impact on a lot of people in the conflict research community. And a lot of what's been written about him is about what a great mentor he was to both graduate students and to junior faculty, right? So Will was very aware of kind of social hierarchies generally, but especially in academia. And he was very aware of his position in that hierarchy and very conscientious about using that position to try and help people who are not advantaged by the structure of that hierarchy. So I hope that part of his legacy is just a general willingness in that community to help people who are just starting their careers as graduate students or as junior faculty. I think if each of us does, a fraction of what he did as a mentor, then we will all collectively be in very good shape. So that's what I hope happens moving forward. And I'm going to leave it there.
Chad, how you feeling?
I'm feeling all right.
Intro.
Yeah, I'm Chad Clay. I'll be honest, I don't know how long this will last because I've been having trouble finding words on this the last couple weeks. But I love where Danny left it off because I think it bridges into what I wanted to talk about pretty well, which is that I think I am one of obviously dozens, I might even say over 100 people who were not Will's student, was not Will's co-author. Will just found me. I was trying to think, Christian asked when we first started talking about this, about when we met Will. And I'm fairly certain that Dave Richards introduced him to me sometime in 2008 or 2009 at a conference. But I legitimately don't remember the first time I met Will. Like if I just reflect on when I met Will and Will in my life, it's just like he was there. And it's not like he just appeared in my life and was like, to steal from the Most Def quote, you know, a giant, like he wasn't like a giant in the hillside somewhere. He wasn't distant from me. He was immediately in my life and a mentor. Like from the moment he showed up, he knew what I was interested in, and he took an interest in me doing that as well as he thought I could, which was just amazing. Like he was one of the first few faculty members that I had ever met that had no particular interest in me. I didn't even apply to FSU for the PhD program. And he just showed up and started taking care of me in a lot of ways. And I just think that's such a unique and remarkable attribute that you just don't see much of among senior faculty. And it's one of the main things I'm going to take away from him. And then over the years, you know, we became friends and would hang out and talk about things. And I had a pretty intense conversation with him back in January when he was here at the University of Georgia visiting, where we just spent time talking about that quality, that mentorship. And I told him, like, I don't know what I'm doing, basically. Like that all I'm trying to do, I'm making up for lack of know-how when it comes to mentoring young people in the discipline with time. And he thought that was hilarious and said that was all I could do. And that's, I'm just, so I plan on spending the next few years just sort of Will Mooring in that way, trying to give people my time when I can, because it's basically the most valuable thing I have to give to them. Beyond that, I want to just share one story that I find really another part of Will that I'd like to take away, which is his infectious enthusiasm for the things he cared about. And you could see that every time he was talking about human rights, every time he was talking about repression and dissent, every time he was talking about the psychology of torture and the reasons that people support or oppose the use of torture. But the story I'm going to use is actually from a time when he was talking about football. Because as many of you know, I suspect Will was a huge football fan. He had worked with the FSU football team doing analytics for them. And we were at Binghamton sometime last fall. And as often was the case when I was hanging out with Will, he and I found ourselves among the last two in a bar at the end of the night discussing any number of things, why I'm interested in measurement, whether reality is real and all kinds of stuff. But the conversation naturally sort of turned to sports because Steve Bagwell was there and was talking about his love of the San Antonio Spurs, and we started moving over into college football. And so Will decided to start telling us about a play that he thought was just remarkably beautiful and it worked incredibly well. And the story started when this bar was weirdly empty. It was just the three of us. It was really quiet. And as the story progressed, the DJ turned up the music and about 40 to 50 undergraduates came into this bar. And it did not deter Will at all. Like he just got louder and he started acting out the play on the dance floor for us. And so he backs up, he's showing where the ball's going, he's showing where a block is being thrown across the field. He's running between these undergraduates that are out on the dance floor dancing, have no idea what this guy's doing. And I just remember thinking, like, one, that I was having one of the best times I'd ever had. And two, that I just wanted to care about everything as much as Will cared about telling us that story right then. And it's something I'm going to try to bring to my work forever. Is just his infectious enthusiasm and his love for what he did. I'm going to leave it there. I know most of you guys, I love that we're all here. I love you guys. Hug somebody. Talk to you soon.
Chad, thanks, man.
Can anybody hear me now?
Yo, yes.
Oh, okay. So the rebooting worked.
Emily was going to try to jump, but
Nope, I'll wait. That's fine.
Are we good with you? Okay, not hearing anything.
Wait, can I jump in?
I thought Emily was.
Yeah, Emily, you there?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
So
Reed.
I wanted to just say some technical stuff really fast for anybody who's watching. So we are maxed out at 10 people on video at a time, but what we can do is if you tell me that you're ready to go on the YouTube page in the live chat window, then we're gonna have people remove themselves from the call, and then we can get you in so that you can participate in this. And if any of you find people jump out of the call and want to get back in, you can let us know over on that live chat to jump back in. Yeah, this is kind of busy. But I wanted to also very quickly say what I mean, Will meant a million things to me. But I first met him at that same presentation about the dark side of cow that Sarah mentioned. So I was a second-year grad student, and it was my first peace science, and there he was, not with any slides, not with a paper, but just ranting about the the dark side of cow, and that personifies for me what Will represented to science, to social science. I mean, he represented a lot of things to me personally as a mentor. I wasn't his student, but all of his students are people I like and work with and things like that. But what he represented to me was that he would take things that he didn't like, that he thought were pathologies in the field, and he would start a conversation about those things. So I've been to probably 5 different conferences that Will has organized or been a part of organizing, that the goal of the conference is for everybody to read each other's work and to talk about it, right? Not present papers and panels, but to figure out how we can talk across our silos and how we can think bigger about concepts and how we can change the way that we perceive things. And yeah, I mean, he was just so big. He was such a big thinker, and brought people together to think bigger. And then they would go back and not think big anymore once they left the conference. But I mean, that's the kind of scholar I want to be. I want to be this kind of scholar that creates community around them, and not just by introducing people to each other, but getting them to talk to each other and to argue with each other and disagree with each other, and then maybe occasionally agree with each other. And that's what he meant for me. And it looks like Chad is out, and so we're gonna I think Reed is up next, and then we're gonna get Jackie into the call. So
Reed.
So mic permitting, can people actually hear me?
Mic checked.
Okay. Sorry about all the technical issues. Lots of people have mentioned how amazing Will was and continues to be in many ways as a mentor, as a terrific scholar, as a great colleague. I could echo all of those things. Just really quickly though, because I think we all share very kind of similar experiences with Will, tremendous, wonderful experiences with Will. I'll just say, with respect to creating community, that's been the biggest direct impact to me in recent years. When he joined ASU, We are, of course, very excited to hire Will. I'd known him since 2005, probably the same time that Emily met him. I remember that conference. I remember Emily's, I think it was a poster at that conference, actually. And I remember talking to Will, and I very nearly, I won't share this whole story, but I didn't know him yet, very nearly told him I had just read a paper that I thought was completely one of those duh papers, and I was surprised it had ever been published. And just before I mentioned that, he introduced himself, and I quickly changed my tone to say, no, it was great paper. Just read that. It was terrific. But I won't share that story, that interaction. What I want to say really quickly, though, is that bringing him into the department at ASU created so many changes in the way people thought and interacted very quickly. And I won't lie and say all of them were extremely positive at the individual level, but in terms of the benefit to the department overall, he was a tremendous asset. He really did create a sense of community. Many of us saw him as the way we wanted to move forward in the department, both in terms of scholarship and graduate training. He added so much, particularly to graduate training, and I could spend a lot of time talking about how influential he was to the graduate students he worked with in just a very short period of time. He created tremendous cohort effects that many of us had been working for a long time. Right? And what I mean is a sense of cohesion and camaraderie among the graduate students, as well as a certain perspective on social science and how to operate within the discipline that many of us, particularly junior faculty, had been trying to work towards, but had not really made the achievements we want. And then Will steps in and kind of creates this in like a year. And we're like, man, that's what we've been trying to do. That's why we need Will here. And it was for all the reasons that many people have already mentioned. A lot of it was for his ability to kind of call things as they were, to not be concerned with kind of social niceties and exactly how, some people might take a comment the wrong way, or as Sarah spent a lot of time talking about, we needed Will to tell us how things really were and to give honest feedback and criticism. And that really resonated with the graduate students. He was, not surprisingly, very critical of them, but they loved him for it. And the effect he created among them, I'm scared that we won't be able to duplicate that again. But I know that this crop of scholars that he's worked with for the last year, particularly moving forward, are so benefited by that brief window of time they were able to know him and to get feedback from him and to work with him. And they're, of course, devastated. We had a meeting, Thorne Wright's last international relations graduate seminar was kind of a similar sort of in-house version of this. And it was terribly depressing, yet terribly moving to hear their comments about Will and the impact that he had on them in such a short amount of time. And just really briefly, one thing that I don't know that has been touched on, and I'm not sure how much it will be because it was not obvious to me until just last week, but he had a tremendous impact on his undergraduate students as well. In fact, one of the undergraduate students that we shared, she was in both of our classes, approached me about wanting to create some kind of memorial for Will at ASU. And so we're actually this Wednesday hosting an undergraduate memorial meeting, which our faculty and graduate students and staff are, of course, welcome to come to. But we had a meeting last Friday when we were planning some of this out, and she expressed to me almost identical sentiments to the same things that Will's students and his colleagues and friends have expressed, that they loved having a professor who could give them honest and critical feedback and really challenge them and push them in ways that most other faculty never had. And it became apparent to me that Will has that same impact on anybody he meets in almost any context. And the undergraduate students who had him were impacted tremendously, just like the graduate students are. And many of us who are at research schools don't think about that. And I certainly had never really thought about Will in that context, but it was incredibly moving to know that there was such a large number of undergraduate students who maybe only had him for a class or two, who felt like he really was a significant influence on the way they thought about the discipline and the topics that he was passionate about, and really just motivated them and encouraged them and pushed them in ways that they hadn't gotten other places. So, thanks to them, we're holding this memorial. I probably shouldn't talk about it too publicly, but there's an effort to create because nothing's set yet, but also because of those undergraduate students, there's an effort to create a memorial scholarship for Will, for undergraduate scholars researching human rights and related issues. And I know it's just a tiny thing that we and they can do to kind of honor and remember him and his research. But to me, it's particularly meaningful that this came from an undergraduate population. ASU has 80,000 students or something like that, but Will was able to reach out and really connect and influence a number of them in ways that I was surprised and thrilled about. So with that, I'll drop off and make room for others. So thanks so much for those of you who organized this. This has been tremendous.
Reed, thanks.
Yeah.
It's interesting though. It's like, of course, context wouldn't matter for Will, right? I mean, Will would be Will in any context, and that's his ability to just kind of roll with that is one of the more powerful things. His mom just shot me a text, and she just said she's watching, and she's just wanted to thank everybody for all of that. So, just wanted to pass on Bobby Lord's love. Also acknowledging that those of us that are in different parts of the discipline, there's just gonna be a plethora of Will Mooring that's taking place in terms of everything, APSA, Peace Science, of course, ISA. I can't think of an association that's not going to try to do something. And if something hasn't started in a couple of months, then we'll be coming for you later. So Ryan, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Most of the things I'm going to say are not going to be novel, and especially we've all been reading what's been coming out online, and now we've all been sharing some similar things. But I want to echo a couple of things that I think are important and sort of touch on a couple of things that are really important personally to me. Just like Danny, when I got to Florida State, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do either within political science, at least, and I didn't know who Will was, and I went to his office because faculty members put a list of the things that they study on somewhere on their website or something on the department website, and I said, well, I like more of those than any of the other things. And who would have known that I would be so lucky to have chosen a great mentor, and to echo Danny, to have him choose me, because much like Danny, it became clear to me at the end of my first year that I was now his student. He decided to take me out to lunch, and we had a lunch, and then I thought, okay, well, I thought I was a student, but now this really feels like something going forward. He was obviously a great mentor. He was a great scholar. I'll talk about a couple things about personally, because those are closer to home right now. I thought I heard some feedback, sorry. So I got the opportunity to go to Arizona State and be a postdoc under Will when he went there, and then that was another transition. So after my first year here, I became a student. Then whenever I was after I defended, I became closer to him. But at ASU, we actually I feel like we became friends, and he's one of my closer friends right now because I was interacting with him close to every work day. So anytime we were both in the department, we had lunch together. It was sort of sad because this came from at Florida State, all the professors eat lunch together to create community. And I think he was trying to generate this norm again, but oftentimes it would end up being me and him. And then, the others would join us. And it's worth mentioning, Reed and Sarah and Thorin would join us. But a lot of times it was just sad, me and Will. But it was never sad there. We had a good time, and we talked about all of the different things that people have expressed: football, music. We didn't like the same football teams. We didn't really like the same music, but we had the same thoughts about them, and how we approach things. And I'll just say one other thing: Sarah said something that is really, really probably the most important thing to me, and I'll carry this through the rest of my life. Will made me feel less isolated. Since I was a child, and I'm sure many of us have had this, I felt a little different, and I felt strange. I'm weird sometimes, and I've learned how to scale that back in order to fit into society. But Will, by being weird, showed me that there are others like that, and it just made in the last 2 years I felt more like myself than I have in a long, long time, and that's because of Will. And I'll say one other thing, but then he was also surprising, because I remember he was telling a story one time about having to buy a pink hat, and he refused to buy it because it was pink. But then you hear these stories about how strange. So he was a complex person. I'll tell one more story that is really silly, but I think it's a good way to wrap up. When I first moved to ASU, Will, in his weird way, tells me to buy lotion and make sure that I lotion my heels, because they will crack and they will get dry. And I told my now fiance, my girlfriend at the time, this story, and she's like, that is such a weird thing to say. And I said, I know, but he genuinely means it, and he cares that my heels don't get cracked. Well, I have to confess, I never put lotion on my heels. Turns out I did need it on my hands. Maybe he should have also turned, right? But I'll be goddamned if the last day when I was moving, my feet started hurting and my heel was cracked from the dry, and this was the day after he passed. And so I just thought it was a neat, weird, circular story that I could tell. But anyways, I think this is enough for me to share. Thank you.
Wasn't circular, man. It was very Willish. And actually, he was buying the pink hat because when we were doing the thing in Chicago, we basically needed to acquire hats that were pink. And you'll note, I posted the photo. Will's wearing the red hat because he couldn't quite get there, but he could buy the pink hats for the students because we needed to be able to find them. So it was perfectly cool. Steve, you working?
Yeah, I think so. Steve Saban. I've known Will since 1995-ish. There was an added volume conference run out of by David Lake at a variety of places in California, and it was not just one conference; it was a series of conferences. I think we met 3, 4, or 5 times, and it was weird for me because I was the most junior person in the room, and Will was almost the second most junior person in the room. But of course, he never conveyed that feeling because he was always pretty open with his opinions about pretty much everything. But I've known him ever since because of that experience, and bumping into him at ISAs and APSAs all along the way. I invited him one added volume conference in Montreal, and we just got along because he was just so wonderfully indiscreet and made me feel as if I had some restraint. Most people know me, don't think I have any restraint, but then I would sit to myself next to the well, and I feel, oh, okay, there's some things I won't say, but he will. And so I always felt very comfortable hanging out with Will, and enjoyed our conversations. I will always regret not holding a sequel to a dinner we had. It was me, Erica Chenoweth, and Will Moore. And the funny thing is that most people know Erica and myself would say, well, you guys must have had a lot to say. And it was like, no, we just watched the Will and Scott show. And it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours of us just laughing our asses off as they bounced off of each other. And it's funny because when Will came out and said that he was autistic, borderline autistic, I couldn't believe him at first because he was so engaging and he didn't fit the stereotypes because he was always so, he had this great sense of humor that he could read other people's sense of humor and react to it, and that kind of violated my sense of what autism was. And so I may not have been as sympathetic or as understanding as I could have been once he started talking about that stuff because I just didn't see it in him. But obviously he had problems connecting that I didn't appreciate. I guess I've got 2 other things to say. One is he was a latecomer. Just lost. Can you see me? I can't see you guys anymore. is I and to social media, and I think I got him involved somehow, or encouraged him, just like encouraged Christian. And just like with Christian, I was like, what did I unleash? Because Will was so willing to say pretty much anything that he felt. And it was funny, I was reminded about this today because there were ongoing on Twitter, there was this conversation about what happened to security in the 2000s or the 1990s. And that reactivated to old discussions about the wars between the University of Chicago and everybody else about what security meant. And Will played a role in that recently by bludgeoning me, making me give him the letters that were the war of letters between John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt, and others versus David Lake and the other UCSD folks. And I'm from UCSD, so you know where I stand on this. And Will pushed and pushed until I finally gave him letters, and then he posted them online. Like, great, okay. So there will be, during Legacy at his website, I don't know how long it will last, of the old debates in the early 1990s about the state of security, which apparently regenerate every 10 years or so, and apparently we're due for another round. But that was always very much like Will. I'd call him Snowden, but that would be an insult because I think Will was far more principled and much less of a Soviet agent. But he was seeking transparency in the discipline. He was always aware of the label that was on his back of not being an Ivy League or big school, big name school kind of place. And it's funny because one of the reactions on PSR about him was, well, nobody would care about him if he wasn't such a big name. And it's like, actually, there's a reason for his big name. This is endogenous. It wasn't that he was bestowed, a great name, a great network because he graduated from Harvard. He was always pushed to engage the planet based on the fact that he didn't go to Harvard and was always seeking to talk to people, no matter whether they came from, a Stanford PhD or they were a bumfuck you PhD, excuse my language. That was the way he was. He didn't care about status. And so it was really weird to hear people sort of trying to speculate into his status and why we cared about him. And that's because they weren't reading clearly the many posts that went up about how he impacted people that weren't even his students. So the one thing I want to mention, because I'm going to get off so that way other people can get on the space, is there's talk about events at the ISA and APSA about having a Will Moore event to honor him, and we should do that. I went to one of those a couple years ago for Petty Weitzman, and I cried my eyes out. And so I think it'll be very powerful to be together and share. So we should do that. I think there's a greater legacy, a more enduring legacy we should think about. I've mentioned this to David Lake. I'm going to mention it to Brett once there's a little time has passed. But both ISA and APSA may want to think about having enduring programs or panels or sessions or something. I have no idea what the thing is. I just need to know that what Will's experience, what Will has did was remind us of the mental health challenges, the emotional challenges that we face in the discipline. And that while hanging out at the bar, which is what I do at these conferences, and the poker games are good ways. There may be for new people who don't know these networks of drinking and networks of gambling. Speak to Sarah about networks of gambling. But we should think about creating annual either workshops or panels or just rooms where people who are struggling are struggling. It doesn't have to be Autistic Persons Anonymous or whatever, but there should be something more than just the usual stuff. And I think we can harness the energy created by our memorial of Will to create something a little more enduring that can help other people so that way they don't do what Will did. Because I too, like Sarah, am very, very angry about the choice he made, and I don't want other people to be inspired by that choice, but I want us to be inspired to do things that that help people so that way they can do the work and they can live their lives without punching out. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Before hitting Jill, related to that, I'm almost pushing or thinking of we need to create something like a will-in. It's this embracing of our differences. It's this embracing of kind of all of our oddities. It's an embracing of all of our communities to make us feel it's possible to do that. but there's this other element, which is just like maybe the bar thing is there's a certain degree of intimacy, right? It's smaller, it's less open. There's a bunch of us that if you don't feel like coming out, right, then you wouldn't be in these rooms, but you might be in the bar. That might be the place where these conversations take place. And that might be maybe the location for the will-in effectively, right? Because that's where those dyadic conversations become, I mean, effectively Will would hold court, right? First, you're sitting at a table, there's a drink or two, then someone else shows up, and then there's some more drinks. Then, 4 hours have passed, and then you realize kind of like you didn't give a shit. And then you're having some more conversations, and maybe one or two other people have to leave, somebody else shows up, and then you realize that is the event, that is the thing, that is the happening, that is the transformation. And I guess we're all gonna have our different interpretations about kind of what he did and what it means and how we take that. And so at some point we should definitely have that conversation. I don't know that I necessarily wish to do it now, but Jill.
Okay, can you hear me? All right. So I'm Jill Hagland. I was a student of Will's from 2009 to 2014 at Florida State. Thanks to everyone for sharing. This has been really great. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about when I first met Will. I first met him over the phone actually in 2009 when I was thinking about going to Florida State to pursue my PhD. I had done some work on the Cingrelli and Richards human rights data, and so I was really excited to talk to Will about the torture data project him and Courtney Conrad had just received funding to collect, and he was really excited about it. So that made me more excited then. So we chatted a lot about the project, but also more generally about graduate school, and I really wanted to work with Will. I'd applied to Florida State, and I indicated that in my application. I remember on the phone that day, Will describing to me how he viewed his role in working with graduate students. And he communicated to me that he saw his role as close to that of a midwife. And I remember thinking that seemed like a really strange analogy at the time. And as I Googled midwife, midwifery afterwards, I realized that in addition to just specializing in pregnancy and childbirth, that they actually do all kinds of things. They're experts in recognizing variation in normal progress, how to deal with those types of things. And so I think that was a good analogy. And I think that Will played that role in my graduate education. And some things that I'll remember most about working with him are, one, that he was just really skilled and gifted at recognizing and identifying struggles faced by students at different stages of progress toward the PhD, but also identifying personal obstacles that his students faced along the way as well. Can you all see me? My picture went blank. Okay. And I think the thing that stands out the most is just how generous he was with his time and efforts in helping students overcome these hurdles. And so a couple of stories I have. Will spent a lot of time reading my work and helping me make it better, a lot of time. And I remember in my second year, we had to write a practicum paper, and the deadline to submit that was in the early fall. And I'd gotten it to Will a little bit late, and he called me on a Sunday afternoon from a car on his way to Burning Man before he lost cell service to give me comments on the draft before he went off for the next few days. And that's just, I think, illustrative of Will's time and how much he cared about his students' success. In my fourth year, then one day I was struggling with my dissertation. Will grabbed Ryan, and from Ryan's office, the three of us go into the political science conference room. He gives me a marker and he tells me to start outlining my argument on the marker board. We must have spent at least an hour and a half on that day just thinking and diagramming, clarifying, trying to develop the theoretical argument of my dissertation. In the year following, we have lots of interactions like that, but that one really sticks out in my mind. He just really set aside everything to help me develop my thinking. I think I can say that Will's one of the most influential people when it comes to shaping the way I think about the world, about how political and social actors behave, how they interact strategically with one another, the potential role of institutions, both international and domestic, in influencing political outcomes. Had a huge role in that development. But in addition to that, I just want to make one other comment about Will's generosity with his time to help his students overcome personal obstacles to success. He was the first person to introduce me to the concept of the Imposter Syndrome in my first year of graduate school, and he sent me an article that Ashley Leeds had sent him several years prior. And I remember being so grateful that realizing that other people struggled with the same thing. In addition to that, he often pushed me outside of my comfort zone in many ways, recognizing that without the nudge, I probably would struggle professionally to succeed. He knew that I found networking and small talk really difficult and stressful, and he expressed his mutual disdain for the same types of things, but often indicated rather bluntly that I was going to have to find a way to get over it and do it anyway. And he spent a lot of time, I think, just helping me overcome lack of confidence in graduate school to the point where I was ready to go on the job market. He spoke with me over the phone in person, listened to me practice talking about my research constantly, just really generous in that way. I remember that after I finished my PhD, I took a postdoc, and Will went to interview at that same institution. When he came in to do the interview, he stopped after he'd done his job talk. He stopped by my office, and we just had a great conversation about jobs and papers and life more generally. And I felt like we were beginning to transition from more of the student advisor to colleague relationship. And though I'd always think of him as a mentor, I wish we had a chance to be able to develop that a little bit more. Would have been very fruitful and rewarding for me, for sure. Yeah, I think Will's legacy, in addition to his work, which I think will continue to be very influential, he's very passionate about a lot of about his work, which I think is what made him a great political scientist. But I think his legacy is also rooted, and other people have indicated this as well, and his ability to bring people together. And I wish he could have saw how good he was at that in building relationships and human rights and conflict communities. And I think he could have done a lot more. And I am sad that we don't have the opportunity to see that. But I mean, even now we see this group of people that are together that as a result of him. And so, yeah, so that's all I'm gonna say.
Thanks, Jill. It's interesting to have Will, the leader of the ill-fitting and the ill-fitted, but it works in a certain other level as well to serve as have this ability to kind of identify with all these people and able to kind of like still interact with all of us dyadically, but at the same time, then start identifying these similarities between folks. Many a time Will serves as a bridging point where he's basically kind of having some conversation with one or two people. He's like, oh, hey, no, come over here. And the next thing you know, you're in that conversation, you're in that world, and then, or he'll think about some other connections. And we always used to, for the Conflict Consortium, we ran this list, and basically it'd be like, found another one. It'd be like, okay, yeah, found another one. We were like pouring through like these science lists of people that presented, or some presentation we heard somebody give, or somebody passed on a paper. It'd be like, nah, I got another one. And the large part of that was about bringing people together. But he was a master at that. Jackie.
All right. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get. I feel really vulnerable actually doing this, but I actually think it might help. So let me see how far I can get. How Will and I met was through Sarah, actually. I got to FSU and was working my first year with Sarah. And at the end of my first year there, I think it was 2003 to 2004, she called me into her office and she said she had accepted a job at Iowa and I could either go with her as her graduate student or I could stay at FSU. And she said, if I choose to stay at FSU, she highly recommends that I work with Will more. She thinks we work well together. She thinks that I have a lot that I could learn from him. She thinks that everybody would benefit. I had just uprooted my family from New York to North Florida. And so we chose, rather than to then go to Iowa, which I think was a culture shock that I at 21 wasn't ready for yet, chose to stay. And it was good advice. Thanks, Sarah. So that's how I met Will. At the time, he wasn't working with anyone else. Steve Shellman had just finished up. And so I was his only student. And I don't know, I've actually wondered since then if there had been others in a more competitive market to work with him, if he still would have chosen to work with me. But I'm glad that he did. And then over the next 2 or 3 years, we built up kind of a group. What I'll most remember about Will, I think there are 2 things. One is that he was the guy that made it okay for me to admit I didn't know something. I think that before that, I had always felt this need to prove myself and to act like I knew everything, even when I didn't. And I'm sure some of that is imposter syndrome. And some of that was being young, and some of it was just feeling out of my league in grad school. But he was the guy that somehow, if I didn't know something and I would try to fake it, he would just sort of stare at me, and he'd lean back in his chair and he'd cross his legs and he'd kind of cock his head further and further to the side and wrinkle his eyebrows. And eventually I would just talk myself into a knot and have to admit I didn't know. And it was wildly awkward and uncomfortable. And then over time, I got less awkward and uncomfortable because I learned that if you don't know something and you ask, you learn it. And people don't think less of you. I think that's a lesson that's really served me well in life and in my professional world as well. The other thing that I'll really remember most about Will is that he was easy to talk to, and there aren't a lot of people I find it easy to talk to. He somehow always knew just by looking at me if something was off or something was wrong, and without me even being aware of it, he would sort of make space for us to just have a conversation, and he would listen. And he never tried to fix anything. He would just somehow listen, and that would make it better somehow in the moment. And that's a relationship I don't really have with many other people, and that's one that I'm gonna miss. We had moments. So after, I don't take oral exams well, and you can ask Sarah about that too sometime if you want. At the end of my comp prelim exams, or my comparative prelim exam, he called me into his office to debrief, and he said, "How do you think that went?" And I said, "I'm not especially proud." And he goes, "It could have been worse. You could have pulled down your pants and taken a dump on the table." And it didn't even faze me. He was right. That would have been worse. Not many other things would have been worse. And that for me is just sort of that's the other side of Will, right? That's the sort of weird and entertaining. And I don't know if he was trying to be funny or if he was just being honest or if he was trying to make me laugh, but he said it, and I won't forget it. In terms of Will's legacy, I think others have touched on this, but for me, it's community. I think he and you, Christian, have really worked hard to build something. I think that Sarah and Ashley have worked hard to build something. And I think the intersection of those 2 points for me is really where I found a home. And I think as a result of the hard work you guys have done, we as sort of the next generation of your students have grown up in a community that could be a fierce group of competitors, but isn't. I think we push each other to work harder and work better, and I think that we're merciless in our criticism as you would want us to be. But I think that we do it in a supportive way, and we don't see this as a zero-sum game where we're fighting for the same jobs and journal space. It's just not how it is. The number of people that I've spoken to and that I've reached out to and who've reached out to me in the last week and a half, 2 weeks is really incredible. And I appreciate all of it, and I hope that I've been able to help other people too. But just, it's amazing how supported I feel, and I hope that I'm not alone with that. And I appreciate everyone. And then here's my last fun. Everybody's got a funny story. I got one, but here. So the day I leave FSU, I go to empty my mailbox for the last time, and this is just in there, like no note, nothing. It's just there. Like, and it's a cut piece of the belt, and I assume Will put it there because otherwise it'd be weird. And at the time I didn't know how to feel. Like, is this creepy? Like, is that a weird thing to do? Or is that like sweet and thoughtful? Like, I'm not even sure what the message was, but I'm awfully glad that I have it. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, it's the objects of will, so little stuff, right? So like Will's book collection, it's fabulous, it's amazing, right? And so we're trying to figure out kind of like what should be done with it. And one of the things that I'm pushing for, and it's like Reed talking about some stuff that's still being worked out. One of the things that I think would be fabulous to do is to have some of it at P Science, so that people could have the things that he selected, the things that he poured over, the things they poured through, so we could all have some will. So I think that's hopefully this will force them to now commit to it. But so the other element is anyone who's watching on YouTube and feels they wish to join the conversation, the gathering, the communion, just contact actually, yes, that would be good to know. How would they would contact Peter? How would they do that? Because we have a video link type thing set up.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
They can post on the live chat, and I'll send them a link to the Hangout, and they can join through that. Just let me know. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for me, I think of when Steve Poe, our other human rights friend, had passed a while ago. Will and I talked about that, and we were trying to kind of think of the way to memorialize and kind of think about Steve, and the warmth and communication that came out at that moment was something that was very resonant but different, because Steve represented a very different type of person, for those that remembered him, than Will. And then when Chuck passed, Chuck Tilley passed, it was this interesting dynamic where Chuck had this interesting relationship with people dyadically, where basically you felt the connection with him, you sensed that he heard you, he saw you. But what was weird for me initially was there were so many people that he had this dyadic thing with, but I didn't feel at all that diminished my interaction with him. And so it's this amazing resonance as well with Will's dynamic, is that he had this interesting relationship with us all dyadically, and then there's these like clusters and communities that he had, and then those clusters are also overlapping in many interesting ways. And so I don't know that Will would be comfortable with viewing himself as someone who's very good at building community. You know, he tried to do it a great deal. I don't think he'd necessarily feel comfortable with that. But when you look at the after effect of it, when you look at, I think he would acknowledge that he was good at producing people in terms of their scholarship and helping some folks to kind of like acknowledge or deal with some things that they were dealing with and perhaps needed an outside eye, or they just needed to be heard. To hear Jackie and Jill talk about that, to have someone just kind of sit and let you work through something is an amazing ability to have, especially when we don't seem to have a lot of time for stuff like that now, and people get caught up with things, and there's all these things going on in life, and to have someone who's just like ready to put everything on pause just to let you be heard or let you be seen. Clearly when Jackie was going there, I was like, I think we all had those moments. So it's like my feeling out of it, or not connected to the discipline or to other folks. I don't know how Homeboy saw it, but he did. We went there as well. It was just like, it's like, nah, I got you too. So part of it was that public school thing, right? We were just like, okay, came out of Colorado, came out of Binghamton. We were just like, all right, how are we going to do this? So it was kind of like, and basically we were just like, at a certain point, I think we tried reaching out and some other stuff, and we were just like, you know what? Let's just make it about the work, and let's just make it about us. And so we're just like, forget how the rest of it works out. But if you and I are cool and our people are cool, then it's all good. And so we just set our ways to kind of chipping away, and that was beautiful. That was beautiful to see. It was beautiful to feel. And so I think there's this cathartic part that follows from that, which is if we do that and we interact with people like that, then I think Al Stam referred to it as the atheist guide to the afterlife, which was as long as you see and embody the thing that you admire most about these people that have passed, then we are continuing in that kind of like perspective, and they are thus kind of brought to life through it. Hey Zach, how you doing, man? You just like jump right in, but that's cool. How you feeling? Okay, your volume is not on. You're very prominently featured, however. Okay, so now try to unmute. Okay, you remuted.
Yeah.
There you go. You just kind of showed up, and like you can participate. We do have an opening if you have something to talk about.
Yeah, I was gonna wait for you to finish. Sorry about that.
Oh no, don't apologize at all.
You're hearing your echo from the YouTube channel.
Oh, okay, all good. So no. It's like it's a good segue. So
yeah, I mean at this point, nothing I say is going to be new. I'm Zach Starnett-Threlkeld. I got my PhD from UC San Diego in 2016. And my first memory of Will was at either APSA or ISA. You know, I was writing my prospectus and I emailed him out of the blue. You know, seen him, cited him a couple times, and you know, not only did he give me the time of day, but he gave me an hour or two of his day. And that was the first time that had happened with a professor outside of UC San Diego. And I think, you know, a lot of people have talked about imposter syndrome, and we know this is a thing. And this was probably the first time that I felt like there was a future, that if this person who didn't know me felt like he would discuss something with me and they were ideas worthy of discussing, that I was on the right track. And, you know, like seeing what's happened in the last 10 days, on one hand, I realized I wasn't special at all, but that's just what makes Will very special. And then the second anecdote, I mean, was just before his passing. I just moved to LA and trying to figure out which route to take, how to do the commute. And so I wrote this script and I shared it on Facebook because I thought it was kind of cool, kind of useful, that sort of thing. And, you know, people commented on it, and he actually shared it. You know, I hadn't talked to him in a year or two, but he thought it was nifty. He shared it to all of his friends. There was discussion on it from people I didn't even know, you know, classic Will, bringing people together, encouraging people. And then, you know, it's just tough because certainly at that point, it was just maybe 2 or 3 days before he went. You know, he knew what was happening, but he was as engaged and as supportive as always. And I'll miss him. So that's all.
Zach, thank you
for organizing this.
Thank you. What was intriguing in many ways was so we had I'm gonna re-up on the virtual workshop. We did 50, but we only recorded like 41, I think, because we had some technical problems as these things happen. But we had just finished the last one. We had agreed, because we debriefed after all of them for like an hour and a half afterwards. He was like, I think that was the best one we did. And I was like, yeah. And then he was just like, and then being Will, right? He had the file where we talked about what we wanted to do initially 4 years ago. He's like, well, and then he went down the list. He's like, okay, so we wanted varying rank. We want gender balance. We wanted multiple disciplines. We wanted some people that never knew one another at the beginning of the conversation, but at the end of the conversation, they were just like, you know, I might go back to them later for some comments. And at least 1 or 2 ideas to come out of that would lead to other collaborations. And he was just like, he just went down the list. And then for people that we had said no to for the sessions, we tried to set up mini sessions. And so, bless him, right? Will went through all the mini sessions the last week he was with us to make sure all the sessions were set up. And you're just going, brilliant, just fucking beautiful. So, all right, so I heard David Siegel might be popping in. Raul Pacheco Vega would like to share his thoughts. I'd like to say that Will's question to me were really incisive and analytical. He challenged me to think about non-state actors and shaming in a powerful way. Beautiful. I heard David.
Hello.
David, you in?
I'm you now.
Okay, can you tilt your camera? I like your forehead, but can you tilt your camera down a little bit?
Yeah,
All
sorry.
right, okay, man, you're in.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks. Yeah, so I don't have a ton to add this novel. I don't want to. I mean, repeating the wonderful things about Will is nice, but probably won't last very long. So yeah, like a lot of you, it's been a hard sort of couple weeks there. So I just wanted to say a couple of things that I thought were not. I guess I haven't heard yet. So I met Will in 2005 when I interviewed at Florida State. It had not been the best interview season for me, and I remember I gave a talk and it wasn't very good. And afterward, I think Sean Early came to me and was like trying to point out that Will was a student of TED. I gave a talk on repression, and Sean was pointing out to me that Will was a student of like Ted Garrett, and I was like, huh? Is that something I should be paying attention to right now? Not a good talk. Anyway, but when they eventually gave me the offer, Will is how my faculty met. I was assigned as my faculty mentor, right? And so that's how I mostly experienced sort of his mentorship, but both that and as sort of observing his mafia as it progressed, during the time there. And I mean, it was fairly affecting just to watch that in action as an observer, just because. I mean, usually I'm a fairly stubborn person, but in that particular case, like I guess Chad said earlier, I had very little experience with personally mentoring someone. And Will seemed to be so good at it, just naturally, that just watching him do those things, just incredibly helpful. And I don't have the same skill set as Will in those cases. So I try, and I think I like the supportive part, but the sort of telling people exactly what they need to know, despite the possible sort of immediate emotion reaction, has been hard. And just trying to observe Will, and having in the past couple of weeks, just reading all these wonderful reactions to Will, and just noting that fact has been really helpful for trying to both not be quite as sad, but also to try to make some better out of it, right? To try to what Will would, I think, want people to do. But I think something that hasn't, I think, been mentioned as much, and I don't think maybe Will even know this. I mean, he seemed to attribute a lot of his willingness to do that kind of thing to, autism or whatever he wants to call it there. And like Steve, I had trouble believing that at first, just because it was so easy to talk to him and so, non-stereotypical in that sense. But that's probably on me for having a stereotype. But I think what's sort of lost there is I think a lot of it was not actually that, but it actually was just bravery, right? I think Will was a very brave person. I think he was willing to go to bat for people and willing to put things out there that other people were not. And that's just a hugely important thing, I think. And my example, which is kind of funny, and maybe not the kind of thing you want to say for a Memoriam, but involves this sort of math book. So he'd been working, I guess he had written parts of that before 2005, before I got there, and he'd given to his class. At the time, I had no idea sort of what it was like or whatever, but I know he'd written it, and it had been part of the math class. And I taught the math class a couple of times because Will was generous enough to give it around, even though he developed it. And then at lunch, because we had lunch every day, and the lunches were fantastic, honestly. I also tried to actually replicate that here, and that failed miserably. Like Ryan, it was me sadly going door to door and like, hey, you want to have lunch with me? No, okay, that's fine. I got like 2 people. That's great. Anyway, so at lunch, Will would just say, well, I would love to finish this book, and anyone wants to like be in this book, I'll make them co-author and be great, right? And I was like, okay, like sure, I can do that. That sounds fun. I just had a kid, so that's right, a math textbook, right? And the amazing thing to me that I think really cemented this whole bravery thing was that Will's concept for the book was, okay, I'm biased here, but I think it was really brilliant. I mean, he really was able to get at what people's issues were, right, and write it in such a way as to address them, right? So that part was amazing. The actual math itself and that first draft, that was not there, right? Like the actual math in there was, let's just say it was considerably less developed than I thought when I signed on to the task. And then it didn't occur, and at the time I was mostly just kind of like, oh, really? But now, like in retrospect, I'm just incredibly impressed, right? Like, what kind of person like identifies a need in the discipline, right? Even though, you know, and he said this himself, I did not believe him because I should have believed him because he's Will and he does not say things that he does not actually believe, right? But Tommy was like, I don't know anything about math, but I think this needs to be done, so I'm going to do it, right? And Tom was like, that clearly is not true, right? And obviously it's not true completely. He knows a lot of math, but like he went into this project, right, solely on the belief that it was necessary to do, and he put his time in to do that. And didn't, I mean, he didn't have it wasn't easy, right, for him. It was hard, and he worked really hard at it, and he did it anyway, right? He did it because he thought it needed to be done, and that just, right, that kind of thing is, I think, a thing we can all kind of, well, certainly I can learn from, just trying to do better at that, right? Trying to be willing to like put yourself out there and do things, even if people are not going to respond the best way, or even if you're not sure you're going to do it right, right? Just, you know, go for it. I know that's, you know, learning to be wrong, right? That kind of thing. Like Jack was saying, I mean, this is the kind of thing I think he did routinely, and I don't think it was just a character of his, you know, whatever he wants to call it, right? I think it was bravery. I think he was a brave person who genuinely thought things needed to be changed or done certain ways, and he, you know, did it. So I don't know, I wanted to just mention that. And thank you all for this, and for all the things that have been written in the past like couple of weeks. They've been really, really helpful just to dealing with it. Thanks.
David, thank you. The fearlessness.
Hey, Kashin, can I just respond quickly to that?
Please.
Oh, I just wanted to say, first of all, that I've used your book and grad students love it. I also think the reason they love it is because the fact that Will took on a project that he wasn't fully an expert on. I think that, I just want to say that was a characteristic of him all in the 20 plus years I've known him. He was the one who advocated for an EITM training approach at FSU, even though he wasn't trained as a game theorist, but he strongly believed that all the students there should be. So I think that was something that I've observed since I've known him, and it was another real strength of his. Thanks.
Well, thank you. We have something from Boombo. He wanted to add or reinforce Will is unique to him for how much he cared for and did for international foreign students and faculty, including him in the discipline, and truly a global citizen, which is very powerful. Will's fearlessness and bravery, I'm sure, are quite legendary in many respects. Quick two that I'd like to share. One was, as would happen back in the day, we ended up in some bar in some location that probably we shouldn't have been in. And so we were coming out, and like some guy bumped me, and I was like, what? And so it was one of those moments where it was kind of like, you know, N-word type of thing. And now, so I think what surprised the person, not that I was like ready to step or do anything, but that the white guy that was behind me was not with him. And so that was, I took that as an inherently immediate. So I have this kind of justice kind of like theorem in many respects. It's just like you can gauge someone's like sense of actual true justice by how quickly they respond, not in like implicit bias, because this is just like actual life, but like how quickly someone responds to some situation of an injustice. And like Will was just like, he just stepped up immediately, and we were just like, it didn't escalate further, because the minute the guy counted properly, he was like, oh, it's that two against this one. So then he was off, and I was like, that was like the first time that, in my respect, Will was tested racially in terms of like, okay, so we can talk about stuff, but are you willing to step when necessary? And he was, which was kind of dangerous actually, because Will did have I'll step there with you, and occasionally will lead. So you kind of had to like check him back a little bit. So the second quick vignette was the G8 NATO thing was coming up. So we had both read Clark McPhail's work, and he was just like, there is no such thing as a protest event. They're protest events, plural. There's all this stuff that's going on, and we missed the variation. And we read it, and we were just like, oh man, we was like, oh, we need to try to do this. And so like Will was ahead of me. He was just like, okay, look, okay, there's gonna be something in Chicago. I think we can break it down this way. And so then we grabbed a friend of ours, Mac, and we did like surveillance of the route ahead of time. They changed the route 2 or 3 times. But then Will's role was, he requested it. He wanted to be the rogue. He wanted to be the rover. So he wanted to take a specific unit. The rest of us were in a grid, but Will wanted to go everywhere, and especially in watch the police. he just wanted to like track the different militarized units as they were moving through space. And that was like his area of expertise, which was just freaking phenomenal to see. Thorin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Christian, for putting this together, and thank you, everyone else, for commenting. This is really special. I mean, I'll echo something that Jackie said, which is that this has been a really difficult 10, 11 days. But I've talked to a lot of people over the last 10, 11 days, and that's really helped, especially, you know, in the office the last week or so. At ASU has been tough, and so the community that you and Will built is there, and that's really made it a lot more bearable. But still, it's been tough. I've got one story of Will's from with Will recently that I really like, and Will and I talked about research stuff all the time, but we talked about teaching one-on-one an awful lot. And I think I learned about teaching maybe more from him than anybody else in the last, at least in my time at ASU, because Will was particularly good at dealing with sensitive topics in the classroom and getting people to open up and getting a diversity of participation, which is something that I run into a lot. You know, I'm a white guy, and I know that this is but this is one of those things that I think that the diversity of participation is lacking in my classrooms a lot, and this is something that Will was somebody I could always talk to about it, and we found different ways of doing it. One is Ryan's randomization script that he wrote in R and he taught me how to use, and that really helped. And there's Will's old poker chip method. There's splitting them into small groups and things like that. But mostly it's about listening and getting people to feel that you want to hear what they have to say, I think, is one of the lessons I got from him. And I taught this class last year on conflict in film. And the whole point of that was to get students to empathize, in part taking some stuff from Will and just everyday conversation that we would have. But the goal of the class was to use narrative films, mostly non-American narrative films. So they would have to empathize with characters that were not somebody they immediately recognize when they look in the mirror. And there was one week that I wasn't, dread is not the right word, but I was scared. I was a little worried about it. And it was a movie called A Woman in Berlin. And it's about sexual violence that occurs in Berlin after the Soviets come in at the end of the war. And so the character you're empathizing with is a German, upper middle class German woman. And I mentioned that this was on there, and Will was like, "Oh, so you're going there?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to try. I'm a little nervous about it." He's like, "Well, you know, can I just come in and sit in on the class? And if you want me to, I'll step in. If you don't, I won't, but I want to see how you do with this." And he did, and he stepped in, and it was he was really good at giving space in this setting, because it was my room, and he at the end he was like, he wanted to make sure he didn't take it over or anything like that, and he didn't. It was very helpful, and he got those students to open up about a very sensitive subject without it being, and this is the part I was worried about, hopefully not traumatic for anybody at the same time, right? And we had a lot of conversations about that, our recognizing kind of our own social context, our own place in social context, our own white maleness. We had a lot of conversations about that, and that one's going to stick with me for a while, that conversation, and him being in the room together and basically co-teaching a class, which was just, aside from the fact that it was a grisly subject matter, I learned a lot that day just watching him, and it was an amazing interaction, and I'll cherish that. And I'll note one more thing about the community thing, and then I'm sorry, it's easy to kind of go for a while when talking about Will. is that I'm part of a collaborative data collection project with Chad and Reed and Chris Ferris. And I don't think without that kind of strategic collaborative community that you and Will and Steve Poe built back in the early 90s, that project happens. Because we're coming all from different PhD programs, coming out around the same time. And rather than think of us as competing actors in a limited publication space, instead we're trying to work together. And of course, Reed and Chad come from sort of competing data projects, right? So the fact that this is what one of our first ideas after finishing school was to put this together rather than anything else, I think is a tribute to the community that you, Will, and Steve built. And so thank you.
Thank you. Raul was talking about Will being supportive of hashtag Scholar Sunday and building community online. From his mom, actually. Thank you for all of this from an earlier post of hers. Continue together to make the world a better place. Dig to understand. Write so your voice can be heard. Build each other up. Leave everyone you know better than the way you found them. Embrace differences that enriches each tapestry, which is the fabric of your beautiful, unique, and individual life. Fear the fear and do it anyway. His mom, the other misfit. Thank you all. It is helping my healing. So, whew. Emily.
Yeah. Sure, indeed. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about how his research influenced me, and we've been talking about his teaching and his mentoring, and that also was really important for me. But and in particular, the online peace science colloquium obviously builds directly on the Contact Consortium, and you and Christian and Will started this, and all of us could build and copy and do things too to add to that community. But I want to talk about how his research itself actually really influenced me, which is that when I was looking for a dissertation project, I was at Emory. I was David Deos' student, who we saw earlier, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to write about international human rights treaties. And David asked me, so why do people violate rights? And I came from this tradition of looking at it from treaties affect human rights or governments affect human rights, and this one actor kind of scenario. And it was not until until David pushed me to Will's work that I started to think about repression as a function of dissent, and realized how few people were actually thinking about repression as a function of dissent, thinking about thinking about all of these things together, right? Why don't you think about this thing and it's all one thing? And it wasn't until I read Will's work that I realized that people weren't talking about what motivates repression at all, at least from the literature that I was reading. And so I talked to Will about that directly, and he said, yes, this is what I wanted to do. Yes, I wanted everybody to do that. Why isn't everybody doing that? And that's been my whole research agenda. And so what he did in 1998 when I was still in high school is this work that was the direct antecedent of my work. And I wouldn't be doing what I am doing if it wasn't for Will's research itself, and then him pushing me to keep looking at writing. And so, yeah, like everybody else, it's not going to be the same without him doing these things.
I think what we're going to see is this kind of cathartic spinning in different directions, right? So the different things that Will was working on as we push off on that front, the different things that he inspired, the different people that he helped kind of create and mold, myself included. the topics that he pushed forward. There's all these different dimensions of his personhood that I think will kind of spin out in these different ways. And the selfish part of me is like, you know, that has the name associated with it, but you know, he'd feel uncomfortable with that anyway. So we'll just have that uncomfortability, right? Because that's just how he rolled. So his name will be affixed to a bunch of stuff that he wouldn't necessarily care for, but we can do our best to kind of make sure that that is as true to form or as true to willing, as mooring as possible. Reed, I think the way that you wish to contribute is a perfect way to kind of like wind things down. Will his friend as perfect. I don't see this as ending anyway. I see this as being one of many conversations that we will continue to have and continue to spin out. This was just one way Emily and I thought would be kind of useful to kind of get things started and put it in a format which would be forever kind of placed up there along with the written text if people want to see something, if people want to read something. If people, I think there'll be a bunch of different ways that we will do this. And so this is just another one. So Reed.
Yeah, I know I made a lot of comments earlier about Will as a mentor, scholar. I guess I just kind of wanted to close with a nod to Will as friend, which is, you know, when I knew him as a grad student, as a junior faculty member here at ASU, he was an inspiration. He was a mentor. He gave me great feedback, but I saw him as a kind of colleague and a scholar in the field who I hope to emulate. And once he moved to ASU, he quickly became a friend, because if you know Will, as Christian said, Will is down for whatever, and I think that was well put. You could always drop by Will's office. Will was always down for watching a football game and having a beer. And so I got to know Will on a much more personal level, and I, if it was possible, liked him even more. Kind of getting to know this side of him, which was still, very awkward and loopy in many ways. But one of the great things about Will, I felt, was he was clearly an incredibly compassionate and empathetic person, and that really manifests in him being just a terrific listener and someone who is willing to shoulder other people's burdens and problems, and that's not something that I think we share with a lot of our colleagues. Some of us are fortunate enough to, but having Will here was amazing in that way, and it's just a really quick kind of personal specific narrative. My wife and I gave birth fall semester, and won't go into any of the details on that, but it had been kind of a challenging and trying experience. Obviously, nothing went as planned, and so one night, very late, I think it was the day after our daughter was born, I came into the office late in the evening, because the hospital is literally right across the street, to pick up a couple books that I needed for a class I was still teaching online, and Will happened to be in his office. And so I just dropped by for a second to say hi, but quickly kind of found myself unloading like all of this stuff onto him, which I had no intention of doing. He just happened to be there, and I needed to tell somebody what was going on. I really hadn't talked to anybody else outside of our parents really quickly, and it was just great to have Will there to listen, because if you know kind of Will's personal family history, it had some significant tragedy, and it was nice to have someone just say, yeah, man, I know I've been through this and more, and everything will be fine. And I needed that so much right then, and he was the perfect person to be there and listen and give me some support. And I was totally overreacting and just no sleep and stress, but I needed that, and Will delivered it. And there's one more quick point. Will was the first person to offer to babysit for us, which was just amazing, right? Because having been a scholar with young children, he knew how much work-life balance mattered, how hard it was to carve out some time for yourself outside of work, outside of your family. And unfortunately, we never had the opportunity to take him up on it, but it meant a lot for him just to say, hey, whenever you guys need to go grab dinner, I'm happy to watch your kid. And I'm sure he was absolutely sincere about that, because that's who Will was. So I won't belabor that. It just, I wanted to end kind of with, I feel like I got to know Will in a variety of capacities, as a graduate student, as a mentor, kind of as a colleague. Once I was, I had a job and was, in the profession, and then as a colleague in the department, and finally as a friend. And, I think I'll really miss the latter most. I mean, Will as friend was a unique experience that I can't imagine replicating ever. So I'm really appreciative for that. And I'm appreciative for all of you who helped put this together. I think this was a great tribute. So I'll hop off again and let anybody else follow if they like.
This is a good collective breathing moment, I thought. It's interesting how Will prompted us in different ways. What would always be interesting is like when Will found somebody, Will would be like, he described a person to me, or it would be somebody that I met and like dismissed or something like that. He increased my tolerance for stuff, right? Because then I'd see it from like Will's perspective. He's like, no, don't write them off. And then I find myself then open to that, because I'm just like, okay, I would not jump to it in a particular way. And then I'd do the same to him. And Will's strong-willed, right? So literally, initially no, and then he's like, oh, okay, I see, I get it now. And then you just see this co-evolution that you had with him and his openness to kind of go there with you in different ways, which was just phenomenal. There's, I don't think we quite view the academy in the way that we should, in the sense that we're joining this fellowship. It is this fellowship of fellows that have, decided to kind of spend our time on this particular topic area for a variety of different reasons, and to occupy this space and time and effort and bring our lives, bring our baggage with it. And while this whirlwind of stuff is going on, try to progressively move in a direction. And Will was just willing to just constantly go into that whirlwind and help you re-find out where the stars were and better navigate your ship. And that was just, it's an amazing gift. And he helps you sail, he helps you find the stars so you could do it yourself. And he'd occasionally go in after you if you fell overwards. And that was just, that's just an amazing way to think about him. Emily, you just popped back in. I imagined that since you came in.
I don't have something to say. I just wanted
since
to
you came in a different way. I'm like, once you're over here, you came in. just kind of roll collectively. So I'll view this as kind of like the electronic version of the hug that basically everyone will get and everyone deserves and everyone is doing, just to have us at full force at 10 folks in this, and God knows how many else we have people going on as well. Jackie just put up chriscamp.org. I think, I don't know where we're going to put it, but we need to kind of pull all of our stuff together and put it all in one spot. Not just the things he wrote, but the things he talked about, the things he blogged about, the things he did. You get little snippets of his Burning Man kind of versions of life. I think those need to come out. The whatever video we have on that, there's got to be something. All the stuff that he did on the G8 NATO stuff. I started the Adventures thing in part to kind of be explicit about these different things that we did, because it was strange for me, because like the first thing I do is, right, you go to Will's Vita, right, because he puts everything on his freaking Vita, and then I realized everything that we were doing, basically like 9 out of the 10 things we were doing were not on there because we were just doing them. And I think he was just like that. How many conversations had you had with Will, right? It's like there's thousands of conversations you have with this guy, and it's just like, okay, clearly the Vita analogy has to go away at that point because he's so much more than that. But in terms of trying to kind of think about him and reflect on him, it's like, I don't know about you, but I have all the conversations going on in my head, and to the degree to which we could all kind of externalize that seems to kind of, not that I want to capture Willness, because I don't think that's possible, or Willosity or mooring or whatever the fuck we call it, or all of them. But I think I think the collections that we get there, I think the way that we think that he's been at the core of this kind of like whirlwind and cast us off in all these different ways. I think Tilly described Jim Scott's work once as, or actually I'm completely forgetting it now. I think it was basically, he said, no one has sent as many ships off into so many different seas intellectually, and Will was a different version of that. He's another kind of ability to kind of like set people a sea in their own boats to kind of like find their way, and occasionally we'd be like a huge armada that seems to be coming back together for this visitation and memorialization, but also he kind of allowed us to kind of go off and find our own islands and so forth. And so I think that gift is amazingly beautiful. And what better way to kind of think of Will as being this beautiful soul, but clearly he was that, and we are all these little pieces of it. I love that picture of the old Leviathan image, where just like they have Thomas Hobbes' piece. It's like, it's a picture of all these little beings that are part of it. But if that becomes Will, and Will has this ability to kind of go out into them and go out into us, and then we're able to kind of pass that forward. And I think we've paid stuff forward, we're paying it backwards. I think every metaphor we could possibly think of will probably also come up, and all these emotions and all these feelings and all these other connected things that we're able to pull together. Forgive the rambling, but fuck it. what better way to go? I know that in his making everyone feel stronger and being able to be more themselves, even discovering themselves, I think that's this amazing gift. I know that Reed and I are going to try to write something for PS, I think, and encourage everybody else to do their writing and their speaking and their other types of stuff. I needed a logo for Will, of course, as you know. I had to come up with something, and so that one more logo you will see on everything is, I believe, I will start spray painting the planet with it, as it deserves to, as our friend, colleague, and love continues to affect us. Go fucking figure that he'd still be doing that, but be it as it was. I have no idea how we should perhaps end this, and this is perhaps as good a way as any to have us not end this particular experience, because I think that we'll just be rolling with this one for quite some time. But I think Harassment will also make sure that we're keeping stuff correct. There's an old Big Daddy Kane rap called "Ready and Willing." There's no reason anyone would have heard this, but "Ready and Willing" is raw, and I can't think of Will was raw in the best of possible ways, and so continuing to kind of spin us in that particular direction, I think, is one of also his legacies. We are the interesting embodiment of that legacy. So thanks everybody for joining. Emily, thanks for facilitating. Everybody from all the different points and perspectives of Will's life. Sorry if we weren't able to accommodate more, but please feel free to do this too, right? So everybody feel the love that we will then kind of continue to express and feel and bring together. I can't wait to see all of you. So yeah, go hug somebody, go hug everybody. But all good.
Okay.